Time when we heed a certain call, when the world must come together as one. There are people dying. Oh, when it's time to lend a hand to life, the greatest gift of all. We can't go on pretending day by day that someone somewhere will soon make a change. We all a part of God's great big family. And the truth, you know, love is all we need. We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones who make a brighter day. So let's start giving. There's a choice we're making.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, again. Thank you for having me here. My remarks will be very short. We made this film to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the famine. Many of you who are 40 years old will remember that time very well. And it's scary that it is actually 40 years since it happened. But also, the documentary showcases what is possible. 1984 and 1985 was a blueprint for what is possible when the world stands together as one. Many things have changed, obviously. Africa has changed tremendously, but many of the challenges remain the same. Massive famine in Sudan as we speak now. Ethiopia, northern Ethiopia, the same places that my father filmed in 1984, again under huge pressure of famine there. Man-made. Most of these disasters are man-made. I'm just reading now attempted coup or a possible coup happening in South Sudan. Again, 10 minutes ago, they apparently have taken over the presidential palace in South Sudan and disarmed all of Riek Machar's guards. So we still have many challenges on this continent. The closure of USAID, the reduction of aid from many European countries, is going to force the pace of change, where private sector has to increase its role in sustainable economic growth, and Africa's transition beyond aid has to be sped up now. So I'm hoping this conversation, this webinar, will talk a lot about that. We know there's huge investment on this continent. We know that there's huge potential. There's amazing people on this continent, but we have a lot of challenges, and I hope that we will be able to step up and make sure that we are not reliant on anybody outside our continent in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amin. The mic is doing that thing. It's called the power of gravity, you know. Good morning, everyone. It's afternoon, okay? Tell your neighbor, wake up, wake up, wake up. All right, it's afternoon. You guys look beautiful from up here. My name is Nokit Kimboy. Reason why I'm maintaining this microphone, because our next speaker is way taller. So most likely we'll face similar challenges. Yeah, just like Africa, the way you've mentioned. Especially now we are in the era of Trump 2.0. And it's very, very clear that is America-centric. The rest of you have to think about yourself. And the big question is Africa thinking about itself? Well, that's part of the questions that we will be answering today. But in the interest of time, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. He is the partner and director at BCG. He joined BCG in 2025 to support the firm's clients, primarily in Africa and Southeast Asia, across the practice in areas of social impact, climate and sustainability, and principal investing. And he's based here in Nairobi. So when it rains and traffic is bad, he's one of the people who are affected. And prior to joining BCG, he He was the inaugural CEO of GEOP, which is the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, which is an innovative new global philanthropic organization created by the Rockefeller Foundation, the IKEA Foundation, and the Bezos Art Funds. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I invite him on stage, kindly clap for him, encourage him on this cold afternoon so that he can feel warm and welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Simon Harford.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Noah. I'm going to de-risk, which is an important subject in Africa, by having a second microphone. Good afternoon, everyone. Everyone who's here with us in person, and good afternoon, everyone who's joining us on the webinar. And thank you to ALN for bringing us all together with such an important subject. Our theme is pretty huge: private sector role in Africa's energy transition, and Africa's economic transition. If that weren't huge enough, I've also been asked to touch on climate. So 2 huge subjects in 10 minutes. So I'll do my best. In practice, all I'm going to do is at some speed try to raise some topics and some big themes that are on my mind or have been in my career for the panel to pick up on and run with. So I hope to create some thought for discussion by the talented panel. In terms of my own background, I bring a diversity of experience to this, which I'm finding very helpful in a world where I believe we've all got to work in new coalitions and new partnerships and new models. I've been management, building and running businesses. I've been an investor for a long time in private equity and in venture capital. Most recently, I've worked with large global philanthropy in the space of clean energy. And now, of course, with BCG, bringing their skills to both public sector, private sector, and the development space. I'm also delighted now to be a resident of Nairobi as of exactly 4 weeks ago. So the key question we're discussing today is how the private sector can lead Africa's transition to economic self-sustainability. But I'm going to add in this extra crucial factor, which is the context of climate change. We cannot divorce the private sector topic from the wider reality of the climate change around us. BCG's just published a further economic analysis of climate change as well. Actually, yesterday, the UNDP and OECD also published on this subject, specifically around the economic costs of not addressing it and the economic upside of addressing it. The core point being, both in the report that we published, but also the one yesterday from UNDP and OECD, to try to shift the debate and the approach in climate change to the economics and trying to dial down somewhat the politics. Just a few little data points from both reports, actually. Thankfully, they were pretty aligned in terms of the data and the conclusions. We are on course by the end of this century for +3 degrees. The worst hit, as I think we all know, is going to include Africa and parts of Asia and parts of South America. If we continue on that status quo trajectory, global GDP will accumulate to drop by some 15 to 34%. That's the equivalent of the EU economy ceasing to exist. Gone. That's the business as usual consequence. Another way of putting it, which is not, in my opinion, talked about enough, is the cost of inaction. There's a lot of talk about the cost of energy transition and the cost of addressing climate change, but there's not enough talk, in my opinion, about the financial and economic cost of not doing it. It is greater, because actually mitigation is much bigger in terms of its return on investment than adaptation and resilience. They're all important, but mitigation gives greatest bang for buck in terms of dropping that cost of inaction. Within that GDP loss, the greatest loss will be here in Africa. We all know the consequences for agriculture, for labor productivity, for cities, for water, etc. But interestingly, particularly in light of recent developments with the US administration, if we could retain this lost GDP growth of inaction through our action, 1/80th of the savings by addressing climate change would eradicate global poverty in terms of the cost that we are all spending on trying to address residual poverty. 1/80th of the savings would remove it. And on infrastructure, we all know there's a massive gap in financing infrastructure in Africa. 100 billion a year is the typical figure from the AFDB who model this. 1/7 of the savings from engaging in addressing climate change would raise 3.5 trillion annually to the end of this century, dwarfing the financing gap for African infrastructure. So it's very interesting as some developed countries have justified recent reductions in aid to bolster defense. Where's this economic cost benefit in the equation for climate change, inaction and action? It's not even in the debate. So I think it's a false premise to link directly reduction in aid is needed to increase defense spending. Now, we all know that there are a lot of barriers to a more rational, collaborative approach globally to climate change, and we must continue working on those barriers. But that brings us back to the private sector, where if the private sector can get on with actions that are less dependent on geopolitics, then we in the private sector, with partners outside the private sector, can start to erode this cost of inaction. So in this world of climate change, how can the private sector best lead Africa's economic model? My view is, how can it not? To me, it is the answer. We've got the history of the aid versus trade debate, and this is not remotely to suggest there's not a critical role for aid and development. Of course there is. In certain areas, the private sector will not, cannot, arguably should not reach. I was fascinated to hear about some work UNHCR is doing, mobilizing private sector. So even there, in humanitarian areas, there could be a smart new way of working, catalyzing private sector money. But broadly, we know that in Africa, the greatest progress in economic growth and therefore jobs has come from trade, not aid. The data shows that. But secondly, we are all acutely aware of the jobs crisis in Africa. This has sometimes been described as a demographic dividend. I think we're way beyond that point. This is a demographic time bomb if collectively we have not collectively created enough jobs for young people and livelihoods to meet that demographic trend. And we know economically and empirically the greatest source of job volume is through SMEs. So what is the future and the outlook for the SME sector in Africa? In my opinion, as I'll touch on shortly, it is not enough by volume and it is not enough by scale. SMEs becoming medium-sized and large size and creating jobs. It'd be great to hear from our colleague on the panel who runs a very successful large business of some of this SME and the venture space that Rao's observing. So as if climate were not enough, we've obviously now got a reduction in development finance. We've all seen the announcements. We're all reeling from consequences, including obviously here in Nairobi. Just a few bits of data on this that we've put together. Total development finance, ODA plus philanthropy plus sort of quasi similar categories, $291 billion per annum. 80% of that comes from 8 countries. And by far the largest was the US, 65 billion, of which 41% of that US figure comes to Africa and the Middle East. It's hard to split that out. So 41% of 65 billion is potentially reducing or going. We've put together the total of that 291 billion that we believe could be at risk. And it's not just the US, Britain, France, Netherlands, let's wait and see on Germany, 26%. We believe, estimated right now, 26% of recent development finance flows could be at risk over the next 2 to 3 years, of which 90% are currently in the form of grants. So the concessional sort of impact layer of that is minor. So the question becomes, how do we replace this? There are some market voids that is really hard for the private sector to go into. But again, we'll hear from the panel on innovative models. What can the private sector do to address this? In my opinion, yes, in some sense as a crisis, but I'm going to assert as an opportunity. There's a need, yes. But I think there's categorically an opportunity sitting in this crisis. Never let a good crisis go to waste. There's an opportunity for not just the private sector, but for other actors to reimagine ways of working, ways of catalyzing finance, and different types of partnership. That is the exciting thing, I believe, that we can all now look at as we deal with this new development. So what concrete steps can business take against this context? And this is what the panel is going to be discussing. I'll offer up a few thoughts going into that panel. And obviously, one reason I'm here now living in Nairobi, I believe Kenya and actually the East African community is possibly the most exciting place right now in sub-Saharan Africa for entrepreneurship, for the venture ecosystem, for new models and innovations. And that's the main reason why I wanted to come and be based here for my next role. So I think we've got a myriad of very interesting, live, real examples right here in our home territory. So I'm going to suggest a few very specific thoughts on the private sector. Number one, just do it. And there's a lot of younger people here on the webinar and in the room. If you're contemplating starting a business, if you're contemplating joining a business, if you're contemplating participating in the private sector, just do it. We need as much talent and innovation and fresh thinking and as we can possibly get. My second point is a subject that I've worked with for many, many years. How do we shift entrepreneurially created organizations into institutions that endure? And institutions that endure way beyond the founding entrepreneur or the founding entrepreneurs. There's far too big a failure rate of entrepreneurs moving into a sustainable institution that is not reliant on them. There's a massive failure rate of family businesses from first generation to second to third. We have got to try and course correct that, in my opinion, if we're to scale new ventures into SMEs, create the jobs, SMEs into large companies, create enduring, sustainable private sector organizations across all bits of the economy. There's a lot of venture excitement about where's the next unicorn, typically something with a suffix of tech, particularly fintech. That's not enough. We can't just be building a venture industry around potential unicorns. We need the small, regular, cross-economy, boring but important businesses that drive a balanced economy. And we've got to get the venture industry spreading across all of that. 6 or 7 very specific things, in my opinion, that I've been working on for many years to try and help entrepreneurs to create an enduring institution. Number one is leadership. It's got to be we, not me. It's got to be building a balanced leadership team that is not just great individuals, but the team itself is optimized as a team. It's straight on leadership development, coaching, and so on. Number 2 is what I call the plumbing of what actually a good, robust organization needs. It needs great finance. It needs good reporting. It needs good talent management. It needs good legal skills. It needs good impact reporting. It needs good operational efficiency and best practices. Often behind the scenes plumbing, but really important if you're going to scale a business that you're doing so on strong foundations. It needs strong governance. Get aboard early that challenge and push and don't just say yes. Those checks and balances are fundamental to an enduring organization. a tight strategy, particularly expanding across countries, where many businesses here have a multi-country strategy, makes total sense. But doing that carefully in a managed way with a real discipline on execution. It's very easy to talk a big game. It's very beguiling, but it's ultimately about execution. And then lastly, and very importantly, about funding. There are a whole slew of gaps in the funding ladder, from a new venture, angel funded or friends and family, up to venture capital, up to private equity, up to listing on the markets. That ladder of funding is not smooth. There are gaps in it. And it's also very inefficient. As any of you know who tried to raise funding, it's a vast amount of time and distraction of critical people who also need to be running the business. And yet they're spending 30, 50, 70% of their time running around the world trying to find the funding. So that leads me on to my next point, and I'll then start to wrap up. What can we do to innovate this finance space and new approaches to make the funding more readily accessible and to have a smoother funding ladder of scaling businesses? And this touches on impact investors, on DFIs, on family offices, on the venture capital industry. It needs a better matchmaking mechanism. The funding is often out there. The recipients are definitely here. How do they find each other in a much more efficient way? Accelerate decisions, please. There's an opportunity cost of time, and too many funders just allow too much time to pass. And they also have extraordinarily burdensome DD. How can we harmonize DD? There's an awful lot of overlap in DD. What can we do to have more standardized, harmonized, faster DD? Reporting, having invested, financial reporting, and then crucially impact reporting, which is a personal bugbear of mine. It's extremely important. But a lot of the ventures I've worked with have hundreds of impact reporting metrics imposed on them by their collection of investors. Is that really the right answer? It's a huge machine to develop it. And then often only about 10% of the impact report gets opened and read. It's not the right answer. I think that there's an 80-20 rule on anything in life, including on impact reporting. So I think investors starting to work as a group saying, are we optimizing our processes, our approach, our reporting obligations, our methods? There's a huge opportunity there to work together as an industry and groups of investors. There's not enough bridge funding for look at COVID crisis. Great businesses, exogenous shock, they can't get quick bridge financing on working capital and they go bust. But it's a perfectly good business, just suffered an exogenous shock. So what are we doing to fill that space? And then finally, catalytic funding. And this comes back to the removal of so much of development aid. I think this is a fabulous opportunity for all participants to say, what are we doing to really fill that pre-commercial space with truly catalytic funding and then mobilize the massive money that's in the private sector? Number one, philanthropy. The world I've just come out of, major philanthropy. They have got the best form of capital on this planet in terms of patience, long-term, flexible. What are they doing to actually think as blended finance investors as opposed to grant givers? What are they doing to look at system change rather than fragmenting their effort? What are they doing to partner straight with the private sector and catalyze that massive pot of money and commercially viable models? Sometimes, remarkably in philanthropy still, there's a sense the private sector is evil and one should not touch them. We've got to, in my opinion, change that thinking, change the forms of partnership, create new types of partnerships. And then with donor governments as well. There's some donor governments that are doing really great work to work straight with the private sector and to scale SMEs. So new ways of thinking, new partnerships, new innovations. So at this point, I'm going to pause and hand over to the much greater experts on the panel to talk about Africa Free Common Trade and other examples. But in summary, this is why I'm here. This is why I've joined BCG. This is why I'm in Nairobi. This is why I'm back in Africa. I used to live here. It's to help play a role in my own little way in this climate and energy transition space. We've got to figure this out, and we've got to figure out the funding for it. It's to help scale ventures and help smaller, great businesses and great entrepreneurs get to that next scale of size and enduring legacy. And it's to try to help create innovative partnerships, unusual coalitions. I think that's where we're going to have the real magic, is when we think differently and invent new partnerships. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Sorry to gallop through such huge topics, but I've done my best to sort of stick to time. And I look forward to collaborating with many of you here over the coming months and years. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Sam, for that. And thank you for mitigating risk by getting the second microphone, which is very, very important. All right. Or at least have a backup. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're ready for this discussion, because it's going to be sort of a surgery without anesthesia at the end of the day, because it's going to be very painful. We lay bare, okay, the challenge where we are as a continent and what we need to do, and the intervention specifically of private sector to bridge that particular gap that we're seeing moving beyond aid. So I have a powerful panel, some joining us virtually. So we appreciate all of you who are joining us virtually, and even participants who are joining us virtually. I hope you guys are doing well. But right here, we have quite a number of us, and I'm going to introduce our panel. I'll call them over one by one, given their descriptions. These guys have done amazing. If you combine their CV of our panel, I think it will be in 3 volumes, because you guys too much experience, which is a good thing. So to start us off, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome the Senior Advisor, Organizational Health at ESG Africa, Eme Essien Lore. Kindly appreciate her. She comes on stage. Beautiful. Center, please. All right. That is a wonderful dress. I don't know what it's called, but it looks beautiful on you. And it's very African. I think it suits the occasion. So Eme is an experienced development finance professional with a demonstrated history of effective team leadership resulting in measurable outcomes. Eme spent over 17 years at the International Finance Corporation, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. She's also an advocate for a people, planet, profit agenda in Africa, and a thought leader on the role of organizational health in farm performance. And if you're listening to Simon, how we need to restructure our organizational mindset will be critical, and she'll be able to share some of those insights. Apart from that, also, I'd like to introduce our next panelist. Very, very rich in terms of experience. He's the CEO, Crown Paints Kenya PLC. Kindly appreciate Dr. Rakesh Rao. He's an award-winning business. You can just take the red one. Asante sana. He's an award-winning business executive renowned for his transformative leadership and the ability to drive next-level business performance. And as the group CEO of Crown Paints Limited, he has led the company's strategic direction, focusing on new market expansion, product innovation, and market share growth in Eastern Africa. And I don't know how many people are old enough to remember the Crown ad on TV that was very colorful. It starts as a black and white, then colors start forming. How many people? All right. Now I can see where the Gen Z sit here. They're like, what is that? Yeah. So thank you very much, Dr. Rakesh, for your time. Up next, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome on stage the Chief Private Sector Partnerships Africa at UNHCR, Nancy Aburi. Kindly appreciate her as she comes. definitely in her role, she leads efforts to engage private sector entities, individuals, companies, and foundations in addressing the needs of forcibly displaced populations across the continent. And her work focuses on building fundraising and shared value partnerships that highlight the potential and contributions of refugees and internally displaced persons, that is, IDPs. Thank you very much, Nancy, for making time to be with us here today. And since you guys have occupied their seats, I'm tempted to welcome you, but I won't. We have Jeffrey Magana, who's joining us virtually. He's the head of programs at Oxfam in Africa, and actually he oversees strategic initiatives focusing on economic justice, climate action, and inclusive development, with a strong background in community-driven development, labor rights, and environmental justice. So later on, hopefully, we also have other people join us who are supposed to be part of the panel, but that is an ongoing concern that we shall solve later on. Now, in Africa and Kenya specifically, we've struggled with this issue once the policies at the United States were changing quickly on matters aid. Our top officials here were talking, and questions were being asked who will fund this particular program, because we know USAID is funding this and that. What happens? It brings sort of a quagmire in our discussions, because first of all, majority of our governments, we are running on deficit. So looking at deficit, that is one of the things. We have also huge debts that we are servicing these debts. So sometimes when the donor money comes, we look, okay, shall we take it to health where it's supposed to be, or shall we service this particular debt? And we're seeing a lot of redirection of our funds, especially donor funds, towards debt servicing. So this one, it messes up situations. And now Donald Trump, Europe is reducing, aid expenditure. It becomes even a bigger problem, because we still have debt to service, but we still have these issues of, gap in financing when it comes to infrastructure, health, and whatnot. So what is the way forward? And that's what we thought about Africa Beyond Aid and the private sector's role in Africa's economic transition. And I'm glad that we have a powerful panel today. For starters, I think just to lay the foundation, Emma, I'll start with you. I mean, it's quite interesting, and I'm even tempted to sit here with you. I don't know whether people at the back will be able to see me. You guys can see me at the back, please? All right, thank you very much. I don't want you to strain. And when we were getting feedback from this particular webinar, they're like, they threw me in the back and never considered me. So, Emma, for starters, just setting the foundation. When it comes to interaction of Africa and donor money, aid money, I think we understand where as a continent we're coming from, the historical perspective, why there is a level of disenfranchisement compared to the global West, and the efforts to bridge that particular gap. Maybe just help us understand from your perspective, this donor narrative, why has it been so predominant, even though we are seeing a reduction in the recent past? But for the longest time, Africa and receiving aid has been synonymous. Why is that?
Well, I think.
Okay, you can just long press.
Thank you for the question, and I think everybody can weigh in on this, and I think everybody in this room probably has a perspective on that question. To be perfectly honest, I'm glad that we started with the context of the famine in the 80s. And some of you remember that period of time, and we were talking. Nancy and I were talking a little bit about the narrative. Many of you are too young to remember that. The narrative, it was a beautiful thing for what happened, Live Aid, everybody coming together to raise money for the famine. But there was a narrative that was created at the time, and that narrative was Africa is a continent of famine, of poverty, of destitution. And if you think about it, we're still trying to change that narrative. We are still working to try and change that narrative. I think everybody in this room would recognize that narratives are important. And many people's first interaction with Africa was through that lens. Now, again, the positive thing was people were thinking about how do we give, how do we help? But the flip side of that is that this is a continent that needs help. So the shift that needs to happen, that is not happening fast enough, is that Africa is not only just a taker of donor funds and a recipient, a beneficiary, but Africa is also a contributor. Africa also contributes to the global stage, whether it's technology, whether it's food, whether it's agriculture. Africa is contributing. So part of it, I think, starts with that narrative, shifting that narrative. There are organizations who are really trying to be in this space. My challenge for each and every one of us in this room is asking ourselves, what narrative do we have about our continent, and what do we need to shift? How do we need to speak about our continent differently? And not making up stories, but the reality of Africa's ability to actually contribute to the global stage, because we are doing that as a continent. So that's the first thing I would say. And then it goes from there, because the reality is that Africa has been a recipient of donor funds. By the way, one thing that's happening, I think, in this whole context of the United States pulling back is we're also seeing what has that aid look like. It's not just money flowing into Africa. That money also flows out to contractors and other organizations, American organizations, who are the beneficiaries also of that funding. So we need to have we now have the opportunity to look at this very critically to see what has that aid actually been, right? How has it really benefited us? So now we can look at it a little bit more critically in a way, hopefully, that can be more helpful.
And Nancy, to come to you, when you work at UNHCR, definitely the private sector engagement wing, but looking at our geopolitical realities on this continent, looking at the impact of climate change on this particular continent, we are getting the tail end of things. We are suffering exponentially more. And that seems to sell the narrative. Actually, these people need help. So from your interaction, especially with the private sector outside the continent of Africa, and their perspective on helping Africa from an aid perspective, what is their mindset even before we dig into the solution that could be generated locally?
Thank you, Noah. I think, as Emmy said, there is that perception. The reality also is that on our continent, we have so many protracted displacement situations. So if I talk about the area of work that UNHCR focuses on displacement. But I think there is another narrative. I know the question you've asked me, but instead I want to go to the other narrative, which is what are we doing at the continent, and what is Africa's private sector? What are they doing? But also, what can they do more? What can we do more together to shift that narrative in a positive way? And maybe I'll start that by just giving some context. When we look at displacement in particular, across the globe, of the more than 120 million displaced people globally, 4 million of those are in Africa. 44 million displaced people, of which 35 million are displaced within their own borders. In places like Nigeria and Mozambique, it's internally displaced people. Now, 44 million people, if that was a nation, it would be the 10th largest country on the African continent. Larger than Algeria, larger than Morocco, larger than Angola. If that was a country, would we possibly think about Morocco as not contributing to anything economically on the global stage or on the African continent? No, we wouldn't. So those are, if we can think about those marginalized communities as talent, as market opportunities, it's about how we frame it and how we see the potential for them to contribute to the things that we do. And therefore, what do strategic partnerships with the private sector? How can the private sector help us address that narrative and show the potential of our continent in its entirety, the reality of what we are working with, but also the potential of what exists on our continent?
Very, very interesting. And I'm glad you're very solution oriented. Um, and that is the way this conversation is going. Reason why I asked the question of the mentality of even the external outside Africa private sector and how they view aid, looking into the continent. It's because of, I think when, for example, you have different scenarios. Right now we have South Sudan, things are happening down there, a potential coup. We've just looked at it. Northern Sudan, RSF and whatnot. That is one challenge. We have a challenge in the Middle East. That is a different challenge. Okay? Just almost similar. If you pitch these problems to these private sectors outside the world, outside the African continent, do they hold a different perspective of each of these scenarios, and where do we fall, so that we understand also their mindset in regards to how they deal with us?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. I can use the example of Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Sudan, like you just quoted. If we look at the reaction, the global reaction, whether it's the coverage, whether it's the support that comes to us on that, it's very different. And that's about narratives. It's back to what Emmy said. It's about narratives. When you have a narrative around Ukraine, these are people that are so close to you. This is a displacement situation that nobody ever saw coming in Europe, and these are their neighbors. And then something else happening in Ethiopia or in Sudan is so far away. The perceptions are going to be different. I remember when the Sudan situation, the Sudan crisis broke on the 8th of March that year, almost 2 years ago now, International Women's Day. I remember looking at the figures of displacement out of Ethiopia on that morning because I was thinking about my LinkedIn post for the day. And just about 2 million people had been displaced in Ethiopia. And we had just hit maybe the million mark for Ukraine. But which one was in the news more? It was Ukraine. So that's the reality of where we're at. But that's also, I don't want to dwell too much on what they think of us, because we see it in terms of the support that flows for Africa. But instead, I want to dwell on, but what can we do as Africans? What do we do as Africans to make sure that we are showing our own solutions?
Yeah. I think my journalistic side is coming. They say journalists are very negative people. The story is never positive.
This is your chance to change.
I know.
Work on that.
Have some water here. We'll do some baptism after this. I need a new perspective. But I'm enjoying this. Very important. What can we do? Because at the end of the day, we are on our own, as some people will say. At the end of the day, Africa, you have to stand by yourself. Dr. Rakesh, it's quite interesting because you've built a business. You've operated in the private sector for a minute now, and that is way longer. In fact, when we were discussing, the 1985 music and whatnot, you're like, I was doing this and that. A lot of people here, I'm pretty sure 90% were not born. How many people are born at 85 behind? Thank you. Really? They're at the back of the room, yeah? The ancestral field of the room. Yeah, but just on a light note, is that you've seen how private sector operates in Kenya, in East Africa. You've run a business here. In terms of the mindset of the local private sector in solving these overarching challenges that for the longest time have been solved by, aid. We know healthcare in Busia County, USAID have been funding this clinic and that clinic. We know matters to do with HIV and AIDS drugs. In fact, that was one of the biggest concerns. Oh, they're cutting down on that funding. People suffering from HIV and AIDS won't get their drugs, or what else? So we in the mindset, somehow it's like, that is sorted. Even when we do our budgeting as a country, we factor in aid. We'll get this kind of support to be able to achieve our budget. So the mindset of the private sector, do you think it is in a space where it is ready to take on this challenge of saying, yes, things are changing, but we are game to be able to fill some of these loopholes that for the longest time has been filled by aid?
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Pleasure to be here. I think if you talk about private sectors, we do not know this word called word AIDS. We have nothing to do with them because we believe in ourselves. We believe in our strategy. We believe in our country people and believe what we can achieve with resources which we are available. Generally, yes, there are political, economic factors do contribute sometimes on a regional growth or company growth. But most of the private sectors, generally what they work on the building the capacity towards the challenges and situations. For examples, when the election took place, the economy was 6 to 7%, went down to 4 to 5%. Then suddenly we correct ourselves, we cut down our costs, we cut down our marketing costs, we started focusing on operational efficiencies, how we can sustain during that time. So we have nothing to do what is happening in the world about AIDS and what Donald Trump is going to do is going to cut AIDS to Kenya or our business is going to be affected. We don't look at it at all because we have a very hardcore strategy. And of course, any private sector is very profit oriented, ultimately return to the stakeholders and being listed companies being responsible for the stakeholders. So we are very, very focused on how we maximize our efforts, how we can be innovative, how we can make sure that whatever products we make, we can able to take the advantage of the country situation. Like, for example, there's a lot of talk going on at the moment for affordable housing. Okay, like Crown is a premium brand, top brand. You talk anyone premium, everyone say Crown is a more expensive brand. I mean, there's perceptions people talk about, and maybe we are not going to service those sectors. But being an innovative, being a company in private sectors today, in fact, before I came, I met one of the contractors, two contractors to the early meeting I have, and they were doing a business of 45 billion in issuing of affordable housing, which is one of the dream project for our excellencies. So yes, we start focusing on that. We have developed the product according to that. We didn't have the very cheap product, but we need to strategize ourselves because there will be a construction growth going to come in the country, maybe like 30-40% going to come from affordable housing. So we tune ourselves accordingly to situations, and that's why private sectors are successful, because they adjust very fast according to the situations and make sure any given situation we survive and we make money.
We make money, and the bottom line really matters. I know that it was interesting to point out from Simon talking about de-risking, which will be a very interesting discussion here. How do we de-risk, for lack of a better word, Africa? Yeah, and even he touched on MSMEs, and MSMEs are considered very risky in this country. For you to get financing, they ask for collateral. You have nothing other than maybe your clothes, and the bank won't accept that. So what can we do to better that? We'll come to that discussion. But just based off what Dr. Rakesh has mentioned, Emma, I mean, you've worked at IFC and now ESG Africa. This issue of shifting the business culture to be able to, first of all, what shifts need to happen within the private sector to position itself to be the solution giver to make Africa self-sustainable?
Thank you. So I just want to thank Simon for talking about leadership as the number one issue. It's just right after my heart, because I think, having worked at IFC for many years, what was clear to us was when you look at the what we call the hospital unit, the deals that have gone bad, right? More than 70% of those transactions had some shortcoming in governance, corporate governance and oversight, which means it could have been addressed, right? And so I think in the African context, again, we know that the failure rate for small businesses is high. It's high around the world. We're not special in that regard, but we need to lower that. We cannot afford to have good businesses that are potentially efficient and adding value die because of a failure of leadership to get that right. So that's the space that I work in now. And so I do work with private equity funds, venture capital. I sit on boards. And the focus I have always is how do we ensure that leadership has the right skills, the right motivation, the right orientation around leading the company forward. Think about all the companies that you've known that have failed just here in Kenya. And I bet you most of them will have had some failure around leadership. It wasn't because the business was bad. It wasn't because the business model was not right. It's because there was some issue, some breakdown, sometimes we call it nonsense, something that happened that destroyed that business. And it didn't have to happen. So unfortunately, because investors like to get deals done, investors oftentimes overlook some of these issues. We need to close transactions. We need to deploy capital. So we might see evidence of something, but we just think it's going to work itself out. It almost never does. So investors have an important role to play when you identify those issues before the money goes out the door and in the bank account to address some of those issues up front. And there's structural ways to do that. There are definitely structural ways to do it. But most importantly is talking through the issues and getting them right. It is sad to see businesses that make so much sense in their context, the right business model, but destroyed because of just some misalignment with the shareholders, the CEO and the board chair, what have you. It's happening here in Kenya right now. We all know it. Really substantial businesses that might fail because people can't get along, right? Because leadership is just misaligned. So from my perspective, that's leadership and that's number one. We have to get that right. Simon talked about not me, but we. I like that. And I think we should all borrow that. Not me, but we. How do we run businesses collectively? Think about what the team dynamic should be. I focus on something called organizational health, which is a lot about team dynamics. How do you get that right? How do you think about that? Ask yourselves critical questions about that up front and try and plan for that up front. Your investors hopefully will do that, but oftentimes they are too quick to try and deploy capital. They just want to get it out the door. They see an exciting business prospect. And as Simon said earlier, we cannot design investment around that one unicorn. Our continent can't wait. We all know what a unicorn is, right? $1 billion valuation of a company. How many of those are we going to have in Africa? And how many of those are going to help us? We need to have hundreds and thousands of middle-sized businesses that are just doing the right thing and they are sustainable. They're not paying massive dividends, but they're paying their shareholders back. Their employees are getting paid properly. They have a good business model. We need thousands of businesses like that, not a few unicorns. So ultimately, when we start with the question of leadership, I think we have the right solution to get to a place where we can actually create many, many, many of those businesses. But unfortunately, I think sometimes as investors, we get our priorities a little off. And even as founders, as entrepreneurs, any of you, if you're in the room or watching this, you want to have that next unicorn. But ultimately, what's going to push this continent forward is not those businesses.
Okay.
But Simon called it the boring businesses, but we need thousands of those creating jobs.
Definitely. Very, very important. Leadership is critical. I don't know whether we have Jeffrey Maganya with us. He's on. All right. Jeffrey, good to see you. I hope you don't feel left out. We apologize. Sometimes the conversation is too sweet, but wherever you are, thank you for making time. To start with, from matters to do with development and community impact lens, how do you ensure that private sector plays by the rules to promote equitable and sustainable outcomes, especially listening here to, for example, one of the leaders in the Kenyan private sector, Dr. Rakesh, saying, aid is least of their concern, but them is about solution oriented. So how do we make sure that their interventions actually are promoting equitable and sustainable outcomes at the end of the day? Over to you, Jeffrey. Okay, apologies. We can see you clearly. Your background is blurred well, so That is incredible. Your microphone, I think, is the data. It's a little bit. Yeah, we can hear you.
You talk of my volleyball and the back. When I flapped him, I was just so I keep the real misperception around the private sector. I think the sector is comprised as the whole business enterprise that are private only making way. Opposed to some corporates. And this will do small one, medium, IIs, SME to large national. Now, how do we deal with the shishas that he face? It's not really a social contract. So the government does have a contract with citizens, and almost every single citizen actually trying to private sector. And essence, this hides what happens and the section they have. A lot of solutions are actually dealt with by this non-corporate private sector. So all of us know of remittances and Harambe that if the government pays, if private sector that does not really what marginalize the people, if it's going now to actually not mean this actually at the last bond so I found some, for example, estimates many remittances up to sub-Saharan Africa reached 44 billion into the last 2023. And in some places, Nigeria, Kenya, this release alone 6.48. And so that's now counting around all the last words were you know it. There's some for somebody say, or if what we say does not nothing that is you like it, get some of the money pocket. Regardless of what you do, and support so based on other community giving. And so if you look at the total estimate of what people already do. Or people can do. It's a money much more than 8. Now as I said, you have to aspect the cost contract. First part of the contract, the government, that's the tax, and then the citizens. All citizens. So that's what they get for government. We do that a lot of it through people for the time. And some going money, sometimes corporate for ability, but other times the international to make it well in terms of amount of money okay or then organize the stuff. How we will let us start there's because I'm not sharing what any does they and you can continue the question.
All right. Thank you, Geoffrey, and thank you even for the wisdom to be able to mute because of the feedback. Sometimes we struggle with that. I remember the COVID years. Can you hear me? Yeah, every now and then. It was quite an interesting time. But even as we do so, Nancy, Geoffrey has mentioned the issue of social contract, and this brings to discussion, even on a larger context, strategic partnerships between the private sector, with the private sector on the continent, to ensure this, what we term as growth models, are inclusive and also reach marginalized communities. So that aspect of a social responsibility and how we engage the private sector, when you talk about these strategic partnerships, how are they supposed to be framed so that there is actually benefit at the end of the day to the populace?
Thank you, Nora. I think maybe first we need to describe what is a strategic partnership. What can we envisage when we think about a strategic partnership? And I like to think about it as shared value. So it's a coming together of different stakeholders, different partners that deliver some dividend for all stakeholders involved, whether that is the shareholders in the company, whether that's employees, the communities that we're seeking to serve. There is it's a win-win partnership. Rakesh was saying that the private sector needs to make money. Simon was talking about the fact that in the sector, especially that I work in, there are many of us that still think about that being a dirty word. And I think we need to get over that and understand that when you go into a strategic partnership, everybody is in there with a particular purpose and a particular reason. Those of us who work in the social sector are there in a way also on behalf of the communities that we serve, but we need to be open-minded enough to make sure that we need to devise partnerships where everybody wins. That what for me is, and for us is a strategic partnerships. And, in Simon's opening remarks, he talked about matchmaking. I feel very much like my job is a matchmaker in my organization. I am the person that gets to understand the private sector. I do the DD. I then bring that into my organization and help my organization and my colleagues also understand how private sector might bring value to the work that we're trying to do. I'm also an interpreter because quite often we're also speaking very different languages between the private sector. I remember once I worked at UN Women and we were working on gender and we were talking about this gender equity and the understanding of equity from a private sector perspective and what my colleagues were thinking about were two very different things. So I often feel like I'm also an interpreter in this space to bring everybody together, but that's what you need to do to have a winning strategic partnership. And then how do they work? They work by first all parties understanding the potential that exists, the opportunities that exist, but especially the barriers also that can hinder us from getting that. And I think that is where I, especially for the private sector looking to get involved in these areas, spending time to understand what the barriers are, but then also understand what are the opportunities to break those barriers. So we were talking about, Amy was talking about her experience with the IFC, for instance. So if the barrier to entry to being able to come and invest in a place like Kakuma or in a place like Dadaab, which is high risk for most businesses, what kind of partnerships can help us overcome those barriers? So we have examples. We have partnerships with, for example, one of our good partners here in Kenya, Equity Bank, and the IFC, where we as the donor community might help reduce the risk of entry for a bank like Equity Bank to be able to operate in Kakuma. So it's understanding the needs, understanding the barriers, but then exploring what are the opportunities, the catalytic work that Simon was talking about. How can we all, different parties, come together to make sure that the private sector is able to invest and operate in what could otherwise have been a very high risk area. So that's what I might offer on that.
Actually, quite interesting. Rakesh, listening to that particular point that she's mentioned, especially the element of barriers, these walls that have been there traditionally, sort of discouraging cross engagement with different sectors, speaking different language. As a manufacturer in this country, what do you think is that barrier that we need to bring down between different stakeholders to make sure that as the manufacturing sector, actually you're coming in with your goal, first of all, to make money, which is very important, but also to solve some of these challenges, sort of as a way of Africa depending on itself? What are those barriers that we need to bring down?
So if you really ask us, like there are certain community barriers, like if you go to some places which we are still not operating, and because of the maybe terrorist fear, and people do not go there, and the brand is not available. So yeah, you're right. I mean, where the community comes and help us, and we're ready to we don't mind. I mean, in fact, when I came in this country, when I started thinking of putting a plant in Kisumu, everyone was laughing on me. Okay, why you put a plant in Kisumu? Because there's nothing. Kisumu is like dead place and water. Maybe I'm talking about 10 years before. And today, this is one of the most strategic investment I have in Kisumu. So as a private sectors, we are very, very open and very ready to work with the people like you. They can come propose us. They have a strategy, or they have any plans or proposal. We definitely can look into that, and we can help the community, because as a listed company, we also believe in corporate social responsibilities. So we spend like $1 million every. It's not like a small. It's good money which we spend and help community on a various platform. So we always, like, as organizations, we have a corporate social goal every year to get it. Like, for example, one of the things which we have done in last couple of years, that we have no platform in the country, where I created another platform called Timpu, all the painters, where we have registered 150,000 painters in our database today. And all painters, whatever paints they buy, they get reward, number one. They get, definitely some training benefit. They get some social benefit. For examples, we have started a club, where trust, where the people can develop their saving habits. They can save and they can take the advantage. Now, for examples, we took a people around who've been doing well. Now, both these sectors, they do not have insurance, because once they get fell sick, they don't know what to do. So we have created another platform, where we started registering various painters on a database to we give them the health insurance, whom is supporting us.
Okay.
We also take care of educational children's. So we are open. That's what I'm saying. The issue is in this country, where when the proposal comes, the intention of the proposal, the proposer credential, how it can be, because in the listed company we get so many proposals here and there, and off late, when I was new in the country, I lost a lot of money in billing people.
Yes.
So it's very important for us to, as a private sectors, of course, we have various departments who can scrutinize with various proposals, but if give a real benefit to the community and to the sectors, and we can do something for particular areas, we've been always welcome.
Oh,
Yes.
that's interesting. I mean, listening to Rakesh, and even because especially cooperatives, the corporate sector in Kenya, in Africa, CSR is a big part of it. And I mean, very, very genuine interventions through CSRs. I don't know whether there is, the other day this is on the side, one of the leading companies here, has created a foundation, and through the foundation, now they are doing strategic interventions to different areas, health, education, and whatnot. So I asked one of the leaders, why a foundation? Of course, it's like, we want to do good things to the community, but also there is a tax benefit to it. And it's almost like hush hush. You don't want to speak about that, but they're solving problems, but they are also benefiting that value proposition. So listening to Rakesh and the way the private sector has operated in the past, beyond CSR, for the African corporate sector, what are those low-hanging fruits?
Thank you for that, because again, I think Rakesh's example here is so important, because it shows us that we have corporates across this continent who want to give back, and they don't necessarily need a tax break to do it. They're not looking for a necessary incentive to do it. They want to do it because they want to do good. And that's something that I think it might be special about our continent. We just have a kind of an innate philanthropic desire, a desire to give back. I'd like to claim that as the African continent. I think so. And so Simon mentioned philanthropy. Jeffrey also talked about remittances. This phenomenon of people giving back is huge, and it's growing. So now we have about, so the GDP of Africa is about just under $3 trillion. But Africa's investable wealth is also almost $3 trillion. So we have about 130,000 or so individuals in Africa that have a net worth of $1 million or more. So there are people on this continent who, with their collective wealth, actually exceed the GDP of the continent. So that tells you that there's a lot of potential here. Giving now, I think the Africa Giving Wealth Report and the Africa Philanthropy Forum say that we're giving about $2 billion a year. That's in Africa. We see entities like the Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation, where I used to work, and other organizations, their giving now kind of is a multiple of about 6. But just think about if that $2 billion could become 4 and 5 and 6 and $7 billion. There's potential for that. In addition to that, and this is something that I feel very passionate about, I started an organization called Wealth for Impact that focuses on this cadre, not of the ultra high net worth individuals. They're great. They should keep giving. But these individuals who are upper income, who themselves want to give, maybe they have family enterprises, whatever it is, but they're in this cadre where they can actually give back, and they're giving back in a way that is not sustainable. I think everybody in this room has examples of giving. You already talked about it, Rakesh, right? You give and then it's wasted. You've given and it's wasted. So what we can do is we can close that gap. We can close the gap of inefficient giving in Africa. There's a possibility to do that. And so what we think at Wealth for Impact is that if we do that, people will become much more interested in giving. So if we can make giving much more sustainable, so that if you give, and your family gives and your boss gives and people around you give, they know that the impact of their giving is something that they can measure. It's tangible for them. It's something that makes sense for them. We can see many multiples of giving at this level of middle income Africans, middle income. The middle income, that cadre is often overlooked for its potential to actually give back on the continent. And that's something that we want to change. We think that that is going to be, when we look forward to the future, when we think about Africa beyond aid, that particular demographic, we think, can have probably the most substantial impact in terms of really turning the fortunes of our continent around. That is Africans giving back to Africa, whether they're here or in the diaspora, but directing their philanthropic giving to Africa in a sustainable way.
Jeffrey, you're listening to this, and even listening to what Rakesh has said, and Emma insisted that the private sector is willing to give. Of course, we have to strengthen the value chain on how we get to give, the proposals that we are making and whatnot. For you're very keen on the vulnerable community and how this interaction between the private sector intervention and these vulnerable communities. Take us through, in a practical sense, like how will this look like that is beneficial, first of all, and give us a model that is scalable, because there are few companies within the continent doing amazing work. And somebody says, why aren't the rest of the companies in that ecosystem picking these up and having more impact? So give us a model that is scalable, that we can see sort of a balance between the private sector intervention and also catering to these vulnerable communities.
Thank you. So I hand off my body as well as I get a feedback. So I think first before I say that, two stories there that the middle class giving already exists, and is got it. It's added and underappreciated. All of us who simply on the thing know that today you can look from the part of what our group giving on something. This is a new phenomenon that people give, particularly if they use M-Pesa. That's everything was not only to and the same as the added and how appreciated in this study. Now in terms of as a full border, it really exists. It is called corporate responsibility. So there's social responsibilities, which is great and amazing. There is a legal responsibility. And I talk about four broad areas where if the corporate goes responsibility, and I'm not talking about sector here, I'm not talking about cost. If legal responsibility is respected, it's available, it's sustainable, and it's not our environment. So far is to justify equity and it's supposed to road. So priority of the condition of opportunities and benefits. So this would look like So what we are saying, me as a local enterprise, a value divide shade, I could access to markets and financial resources. I think the base goes the bottom line will roll. And so if supply shade includes SMEs, I think that it was tapped into really wide areas that previously not accessible. I think when you join exclusive women in groups, I mean, feels less than systemic parties and like certain capital, either leadership positions in corporate. And I think this is now that would be scalable and could have it done. The other thing is, I think I've heard one other product, but I was covering. Think of it from first that's not concentrated in council than urban areas only. And I feel that Louis Duke is a good example. To do that, it's either in but if it badly doesn't. So that's one end of everything. The other end of things is looking at able right is the distant one or some of their wages. And again to promote more decent working conditions. Not high. I was most labor. Allow free trade in the one workers and taxation. So let's have a house voice musician. Make it gaining. It's a big thing at scalable and it's requirements. So be who's right. Ethical business practices that include you daily because right respect parent in our lands and also the attractive the industries and I can really business do it to ceases and just extra. Try and over and then obviously address less so corporate accountability when questions are by them. I know that the difference between cooperation in terms of citizens is they don't vote. But go ahead also they cannot into jail. It's only held civil ability. So addressing corporate accountability. Then last B is that I was taught is environmental protection. And we know that be nice. That isn't as sure that they do not mess up environment. It could be green trade and other things. It could be carbon free trade. It could be regulatory requirements, but government ensuring that environment and that. Now down the road, all the things as in a Jerry benefit poor and marginalized groups who hasn't like say it. Corporate legal responsibility and social responsibility. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey. Well articulated right there. And I'm going to be coming to you, our able audience, those of us joining virtually and also in person here with some, if you have any question, you'll just raise your hand. We'll get a microphone to you later on. So start thinking about that particular question. But even as we do so, Nancy, in terms of examples, I'm glad Rakesh said when he came into the country, he was like, I'm going to go to the lakeside. And people were like, are you serious? There is a whole Nairobi here and Ruiru. What exactly are you going to do in Kisumu? And he was like, now it is one of the most strategic places that you operate from. I mean, just looking at the East Africa region perspective. So give us some examples where we've seen this effective collaboration with private sector. And what impact has that had, sort of to encourage us on this journey?
So Rakesh, if you are scared of Kisumu, if I come to speak to you, I'll be asking you to come and invest in Kakuma and Dadaab. That is a lot more scary than Kisumu, I think. But I just, in terms of examples, I think maybe I want to share three. I had started already talking about the example of Equity Group. Equity was one of the first branches to banks to open a branch in Kakuma. They now have 2 branches in Kakuma and 1 in Dadaab. They did that at a time when nobody else thought of refugees or the displaced populations as a place where you needed to go and bring a branch to them. I've been to their branches in Kakuma. They are just like any other branch across the country, very well built, very well equipped. It's very busy. But you're working with an equity bank that was already serving the underbanked. So for them, this market segment was not scary at all. They looked at the population that exists in that region and they saw a business opportunity. And they also thought about sort of business practices that were right for the context. So if you're going to go and loan to refugees, for instance, understanding that collateral against loans may not be the way to go, but you can work with social collateral. So refugees form groups and they together go and borrow money from Equity Bank. And that is the kind of stuff that Jeffrey is talking about. That is actually a model of table banking. That is the merry-go-rounds of most of us grew up with. I don't know, chamas, right? But then how do you as a bank take that into a context of displacement and actually provide a service to the... So, and what is the impact of Equity having a branch in Kakuma? It means people, communities, not just refugees, but the host communities as well, have access, financial access, and are able to not just borrow, but also save. And the dignity. And when I have a bank account, it also means I do not have to go to UNHCR and receive a handout, line up in the sun for 3 hours. It's about dignity as well of the people we serve. I can go to my bank account, receive my money in my bank account, withdraw it when I need it. It's about restoring human dignity to the communities we serve. And now that model of Equity has progressed to about a month ago or so. They launched together with IFC a risk-sharing facility, $20 million risk-sharing facility in Kakuma that allows them to be able to lend even more money to refugees. Organizations like UNHCR, the IFC takes about 50% of the exposure cost for that. Philanthropic money covers the first loss so that they are actually able to lend at good rates to those who are displaced. But that's one example. Another example I'd like to share is from Nigeria. We work there with TGI and one of the state governments. In Nigeria, the biggest displaced populations we have are internally displaced. So these are Nigerians who are displaced in northern Nigeria. In Katsina State, the state government provides land. We mobilize the internally displaced people to farm. TGI is an agribusiness. They provide the inputs for these IDPs to farm, and they come back and buy the products from them, linking the market chain all the way. And there again, so that's a private-public partnership at a very local level. So we have very many examples. I think let me stop there in the interest of time. But there are so many different models of how we can work together. Our sector helping convene, helping bring different partners together, understand the problems, and the government also has a role to play in all of that, in enabling that to happen.
Definitely. Mr. Rakesh, I see now Crown Paints Kakuma coming up very soon. But even as we do that, I think one of the larger hopes is this aspect of intra-Africa trade. You operated, you've scaled your business across Eastern Africa. We talk about Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And that was supposed to make sure that we are trading amongst ourselves more, so that we build our companies more, sort of form a self-sustaining ecosystem within the continent. Because right now, Russia-Ukraine happens, I don't know, we don't have grains, for example. Something happens, Africa doesn't have this. We are very dependent. So in terms of private sector scaling across the continent, we've talked about non-tariff barriers for the longest time. This AFCTA, do you think is the silver bullet to making business, intra-Africa businesses, sort of grow and emerge to build a self-sustaining ecosystem within the continent?
Okay, our products are very different because a paint has a more a water base, like 70% is water, rest of all the chemicals. So we have, of course, we transact through East Africa domain, but we had not thought about West Africa because the distance. So if you talk about East Africa, yes, what we do initially, we start with a distribution model like Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda. Once we establish our brand in the market and we place a product, the second phase, we generally open our production unit there. So that's what we do. First, we go set our market, identify the market needs, and within 2 years, this is our horizon, we start opening a factory there. Like, for example, our next phase is Congo. We are thinking about is putting a plant there. But of course, we have to study the situation. whether availability of raw materials, availability of transportations, logistics, supply chain. Congo is still struggling on supply chain at the moment. We like where to get the raw material. Are you going to get from Dubai or are you going to get from South Africa? So we have so many challenges. But wherever we seek that supply chain is very easy to manage, generally we prefer to have a manufacturing unit at particular areas, so we can improve our supply chain, because the market dynamics are keep changing now. Earlier, the people can wait for 2 days to get for a product. I remember came. We have only one Kisumu and Mombasa, and Mombasa and Crown. Okay, there are only 3 depots, and people used to wait for 2 days to wait for the Crown material. But now, look at the current situation where we have only 3 factories. So there were 100 print factory in Kenya. So I have to make sure that how I can improve my supply chain. So I open another 5 depots, even depot like Machakos, Nakuru, every places we've been opening a depot, Nyari. Okay, so we don't left any place. Okay, wherever it's possible that we can reach out to customer in 2 hours, and that have the distribution model to stay near to the customers. Okay, and customers start trusting the brand. Yes, this brand whenever I need is available.
So, I mean, infrastructure gap, in fact, it features massively there, because if you can't even get your raw materials easily to a particular place, and that's a challenge. We talk about flying within Africa. It can cost you more than flying outside Africa. It doesn't make sense that for me to go to Egypt, maybe, or to West Africa, it costs way more than traveling all the way to Dubai across the world. And those are the barriers that we've seen for the longest time. It seems the continent is not operating seamlessly as it should. And I mean, Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement was poised as that solution. But even when you look at the smaller bits, the ESC, the ECOWAS, if we can't operate seamlessly within those areas, FCTA seems to be null and void. But from your understanding of this free trade area that we're dealing with, do you think that will sort of boost Africa dependency on itself other than external?
So I would definitely not give up on it yet. These things take quite some time. In order for the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement to really come to life and for it to really have an impact across the continent, the issues have to be dealt with within the country, intra-country, right? And so there are infrastructure issues. There are even issues around trade within specific countries. So it's going to take time. I wouldn't give up on it yet. Some might say it was premature. I think it's fine that it started when it did. It will take some time for us to see the fruits of that. But I think we're moving in the right direction. What needs to happen is more people who work on trade issues in country and in different regions coming together to understand what are the benefits of trade. And it has to be very practical. So I know people who work in this space, and it's very practical. They sit down and talk very practically about how can trading with this other country benefit our country, how can we do this? And unfortunately, when you have political regimes that change every 4 or 5 years, that doesn't help much. But certainly, there are people who are thinking about how this can actually come alive. But I don't think we can say yet that it's been a success. I think we can say that it's moving in the right direction, but very slowly. But even if you look at the projections of how it's supposed to actually increase GDP for the continent, those numbers are not, or maybe they're not things to jump out of bed around. They are numbers in terms of growth that are promising and hopeful. So we should do them. But at the same time, not necessarily going to change the fortune of the entire continent. in country, for each and every country, that really needs to be where the focus is. How are they improving infrastructure? How are they supporting the banking system? How are they supporting vulnerable communities, et cetera? That has to be an intra-country effort. So I would just say the jury is out, but I think we should all remain hopeful. I'm sorry that the lady who represents the Secretariat isn't here, because it'd be great to hear, because I'm sure she has a very positive story around it. But I don't think we should give up on it, and we should continue to push in that direction, and also make sure that our politicians don't forget about it either.
Definitely. Wow. So, Geoffrey, I don't know whether Geoffrey is there. Just to chime in briefly on this particular of Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement area, because we are also proposing free movement of labor from one jurisdiction to the other. And when these were suggested, there was sort of an element of protectionism. What do you think now with America saying, okay, Wakenya watakuja huku, Watanzania wataenda huko. So it becomes a little bit of a contentious issue. But from your perspective, this project that we are on as the continent of streamlining business and movement of people, movement of labor and resources within the continent, do you think is part of the solution of making Africa go beyond aid? Briefly.
So I think it is. The part of the issue the main dealt with private segment is really good. Is right now it is very by very latest process. And I think that participation and the private side, not only the electoral need to participate in new moves forward, because there is what like almost same time is discrimination against our power at by through their voices, fine way said that. Obviously as representative have the quality of therefore close the thing. So hope that these things find the right way to therefore they don't only sit in exact kind of government the fact of law and society that can constantly community in this treasure that understand is the but also understand how things go. So in order to make sure that this part and discrimination does not, and there needs to be much more transparency about what's going on, and because of what make this sounds. I think those four but the best way to have is as a result the benefits. All the sort of and of the private sector, but also rest of everybody. So society is as important as the private sector, and so the good is important for private sector, right? And sense.
All right. Thank you very much, Geoffrey. You're breaking a little bit. I think we just used discernment to fill the blanks. So we're going to take 3 questions. I'm told people have a lot of things to do today also. So apologies for going beyond time, but we take 3 critical questions. You stand up, tell us your name, and address your question to a specific person. Let's start right there.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Ojamong. So allow me to just give a brief history of where I'm coming from so that the question makes sense. So on one hand, we have the West, which has historically provided funding and aid as we have established. But on the other hand, we also have Africa, which is a very big provider of resources. And as we began the session, one of our panelists said, and very beautifully, that Africa is a contributor, yes? So let me contextualize it to America. So I think cutting funding is a very hypocritical approach when you juxtapose it to the reliance of Africa's resources. Because a lot of the global West economies highly depend on African exploitation and African resources to sustain the economy. I will come back to the private sector. So Africa being a contributor, let me give an example of if I have a charity and I'm saying that I want to help farmers be independent, and I give them seeds, but then in return I want all the harvest. Am I really helping these farmers? No, I am not. So in this case, sorry. So a report by the Global Justice shows that for every dollar we receive in aid, we give a lot of dollars. We give in our resources, we give in debt payments, and also in our dignity, because we are not viewed as equal. Now let me come to my question after that. So I think the question here shouldn't really be what we can do. The question is, how then do we promote ethical investments where we are viewed as equal? Because we'll come with all these solutions, but let me give an example of a cup. If the cup is dirty on the inside and we clean the outside, we still have a dirty cup. We cannot drink from it. So how then do we bring ourselves? How do we make ourselves equals so that even in this negotiations, we have a bargaining table? Because currently we are not being viewed as contributors. We're being seen as a liability.
Thank you very much. That's a nice question, yeah? I don't know who's gonna... Yeah, we can take the three first. There is a second one there, and the gentleman at the back. And finally you. All right, please.
Hi, my name is Amwen Etienne, and I have a question about responsible business. From a private sector perspective, Mr. Rakesh, do you find that there's much interest from businesses, both your own and businesses that you speak to, in actually embedding responsible business in your practice, as opposed to just having not just, but as opposed to having foundations and building wells and building schools? And then to Ms. Essien, as you advise businesses, is this increasing their consideration amongst your clients?
All right, thank you very much. There's a gentleman at the back in glasses. Second row from the back.
Good morning. Thank you for your very insightful comments. My question is actually on the role of the law in all these. I'm not sure whether we have a lawyer in the panelist, but we could probably look at, for example, the existing models that have been tried. For example, in September 2023, the Capital Markets Authority issued the first Sukuk bond, that is the Islamic bond. But we don't have the law for that. So most of the time we are borrowing from Malaysia. So we find a law in Malaysia which would work, and then we bring it in Kenya. So the question is, in all these, is there the role of the law to support such models which you are talking about? I think one of the panelists talked about the existing models, but I wanted to know, can we have the law play a role in these? Thank you.
The legal fraternity. And lastly, this gentleman here, since he raised his hand and he's a gentleman, I'll allow him.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. Let me just say that my question is actually informed by a sentiment that you'd actually pick from the first two questions from the ladies. It was about the ethical concerns of what Simon alluded to earlier, the structuring of the new relationship beyond aid, with the bringing in of the private partnerships between whether it's a government, and I want to say not just Africa, let's just call it Global South, because my question is also informed by some of three incidents that took place within the last 5 months. I worked on a paper on the issue of PPPs, private partnership programs in Africa. There was also a concern for, capitalist interest for whatever Africa has to offer to the world, because I think Amy beautifully said that Africa is also a contributor. Let us look at the issue of biosystems in Africa, indigenous crops, and I think now there's the issue of the global economic revolution with Bill Gates that came under fire. There was the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. Now, Simon also added that private partnerships are the way to go. They're a beautiful way to go because with the politics that come with aid, let us look at something like geopolitical interest compared to something like illegitimate interests in Africa that are fueled by, geopolitical interests. And I think the America First issue by Donald Trump has really sparked a conversation on this. So now I'm looking at an issue where we have biodiversity concerns, we have the issue of GMO, we have the issue of industrialized agriculture. Now, even if we're not paying a price for being a cheap target for geopolitical interest by developed worlds, are we going to pay a price as Africa? Now, also looking at private partnerships, things like unseen liabilities. For example, there was the issue of risks, political risks. Private partners have to be assured, which are things that are very unseen, not realized. There's the issue of political risk insurance, and it goes way into the billions, maybe 10 billions. Look at whatever happened with the airport. These guys had to be assured that there's the political insurance that has to be paid to them, maybe from the Gen Z protest. Do we have a price to pay apart from being a geopolitical when now we restructure with the private sector? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just want to say these are PhD questions. I don't know. These are very serious questions.
Indeed.
I don't know who can answer them quickly.
So,
Well done, but-
we're going to share the burden. And if you feel strong enough to help lift these PhD questions and you are seated amongst the crowd, also we might allow. But for starters, she has a very interesting question right there. Generally dignifying Africa as we come to the table. I don't know who's going to pick that up in regards to based on the perceptions we've had in the past, and now saying that we consider the table as equals. Yeah?
I can maybe make one comment around that one.
Okay, please.
As an example, there is an organization here, the name escapes me, but there's a initiative. It's it's kind of a narrative around decolonized philanthropy. Maybe some of you have heard that concept, right? And the idea there is that the agenda for what this organization, just assume that you're an NGO, you're a nonprofit, you're an social enterprise, you're organized around doing something for your community, that it's going to be your agenda. Typically what happens is that it's the giver who kind of dictates what's going to happen, right? And so there are organizations now who are saying, I need untied funding. If it's not untied, I don't want it, right? So if you want to tie your funding for me to do something specific, you can take it elsewhere. That's a very bold step to take, which is to say, I don't want your funding. Now, that's the question. Are we willing to say, I don't want your funding because this is what I want to do. You want me to do something else? It's okay. You can actually give your funding elsewhere. That is actually changing things. There's an organization here that's actually doing that and focusing on that. And so imagine if all of the organizations in this space started doing that, saying it's either untied or it's okay. I don't need it. That would really change things, right? Instead of being dictated to, we dictate our terms. But if everybody's doing that, imagine how that changes things. So this is early days, but I think there's a lot of excitement around that whole notion of decolonizing aid, decolonizing philanthropy. I think there's something there, and I think we should watch the space and ask ourselves, would we be willing to turn away funding if it actually was not perfectly aligned with our mission?
Interesting. That ties to... Yes, yeah, please, Jeffrey.
Yeah. So very quickly, that so Oxfam runs around decolonization, and I think that one what's happening in the world now allows us to, and I'm going by bad lens, to improve consciously our capacity for negotiate. I mean, actually, landers that's the last to so 60, 70, 80 years has been built on a trajectory in inequality levels of voice. So you have the Security Council, really government can resolution and a few people have and so that we around the has been held very quintessonal on another opposite but the first has been high put southern population but also a very able and association. And I just to answer another question very quick because I'm there physically is I think in terms of laws Laws really should find the society and its people. Our man must knows well was is ability of as a perhaps also so society but or the government in order the law that the things speeds down is done and there's a lot of about Eastern European bland piece of paper and the body of the law of the world. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Can I just say Adesso is the organization that I wanted to, Adesso and the other organizations. So please follow them and look that up. Yeah.
Okay. You've gotten that? Do you feel answered? Perfect. All right. There's a question here directed to Rakesh. You're very slow and Rakesh is very fast. So there is a disparity there. So just recap.
Question is, so what's a pilot that I have CSI legit? So they say do that. Can you tell me without the mic? Online audience. Okay. So yeah, lots of organizations have CSR initiatives. My question is about embedding responsible business within your operations.
Okay.
So as well as considering, yes, I'm going to build this school, I'm going to paint this school, rethinking, okay, where are my ingredients coming from? Are they coming from a conflicts area? Are they polluting the environment? Is that more and more of a consideration for your company? And are similar considerations being made for your fellow members of the private sector? Are people speaking about this issue? I don't care if you consider.
I think we have a set way of doing business, and to be very frank, and I'm very open to the people. When we do CSR, now there are two ways of doing CSR. One is doing CSR just for generosity, and one is CSR which basically convert into the benefit to the brand. So let us, the thinking about Harvard Business Review, which you teach in the management, that you do CSR, but ultimately what's benefit comes back to you, because then again you can reinvest in the CSR. So for examples, our total focus in investing in our painter communities, our contractors communities, who basically we are going to empower them, we are going to educate them, we are going to make sure they have a better social life, and then they become a part and parcel of the organization. Because see what happened today in the organizations, I think you remember two people in life. One is your teacher and your parents. So we thought we should start educating our children of the painters. We thought painting a schools where most of the painters are staying. So we have a very focused and a smart thinking how we can able to cover up the community which helping our brand. After that we can think beyond. It's not like one area, but I think you talk about my major investment goes around $4 million only to this community, which is a huge investment which I do. So it's again a certain area which probably we picked up as a part of strategy, where as a organization thinks, okay, this year let's focus. Like earlier I came, I was focusing on school painting, because in fact I was just playing golf and I went to one of the members of the schools, and I saw the school. I said, I came from India, I didn't know that the schools can be Kenya like this. Pathetic. No painting was done since when school was made. Okay, and children were still coming there. And I was very astonished, and I said, fine, let's paint the schools. So I paint the schools, and after when we finished the schools of painting, when I went there, and the principal told me the attendance of children from 10% become 80% in the schools, because children loves the color, and they start coming to the schools. And I can tell you, I was so happy the way the children has made a song for me, or they were amazing. They were so happy. And after that, one of my determination came that I must paint maximum schools wherever I can, where the poor children are there, where people cannot afford, because there are so many schools approach us. Many schools make money and they still approach us for free painting. We don't do that. But schools which, of course, like schools like in Kisumu, there's a school for a blind. So definitely those are the things which, which we should paint. So I think we select certain areas. We have limited, funding. Of course, we have to do 2-3% of our turnover, which you can go to CSR. Okay. So we are categorically decide what is best for the organizations and what is best for giving a return on investment also.
All right.
Thank you.
My head is on the chopping block here because our time is up. Yeah. The organizer is like, no, you better, you know. I know, and there are questions, but I think that now raises, I don't know, we make this a series of some sort because we still have even, you know, you've just touched the surface of things. But I think we can build on it in our subsequent sessions. And thank you very much. You guys have been amazing panelists. Also, Jeffrey joining us virtually. Thank you very much from your input, Jeffrey. That was beautiful. At this particular moment, we have a small appreciation for you, okay, for creating time and sharing your experiences and your knowledge on how we can go beyond aid. So you may just receive this small gift of appreciation for your input this afternoon. Asanteni sana. We can break the microphones. It's still okay. It's perfectly fine. But ladies and gentlemen, even the moderator gets a look cool, you know, going from the market, just saying, you know, read the label. At this particular moment, ladies and gentlemen, let's appreciate our panelists, please. Santeni Sana. And I'd like to hand over the program to Rutendo, who's very mad at me, like, yo. Yeah, but forgive me. Yeah, apologies, but thank you very much. Back to you.
Thanks, Noah. Thank you very much. Really appreciate everybody showing up today. And please do join us as we continue the conversation in terms of how we can collaborate together as one. As a continent in its economic transition. I won't have much to say. Actually, we would like to close up with a trailer for the documentary Salim was talking about at the beginning, because it is going to fundamentally be shaping the conversations that we're trying to have here today. And I think that with that, I will close. So if we can kindly please play that video. Thank you.
There comes a time when we heed a certain call, when the world must come together as one.
The song, the effort, the cause, it was meaningful. It was actually meant to be, how do we give back with all that talent? What do we do with all of that fame and power? And we decided to make a country out of ourselves, and it worked.
Now the task is how to corral all of these artists and get them in a place that would be convenient for them to make this recording.
God's great big family and the truth, you know, love is all we need. Beyond the world, beyond the children, beyond the ones who make it brighter than day. So let's start giving. There's a choice we're making.
That night, we did something wonderful. And so to turn around on that stage and see all these artists really happy to be there, not for the song, but for the cause.
We all knew why we were there.
Well, send them your heart.
You could see the urgency, but you also saw big smiles and let's do this and let's do it the way it's supposed to be done.
You know, it all really started with a call from Harry Belafonte. We'd all been seeing these pictures on television that Muhammad Amin had shot, but Belafonte, typical of Harry, decided to take action.
We are the world. We are the children.
This was a sacred moment and an important thing we all had to do. When you saw the pictures as began to flow from out of the BBC in London, and NBC picked it up, and then all of a sudden the world was exposed to this devastation. Then the real task began.
Every report coming out by September and into early October of 1984, it is utterly clear how the scale of this is growing all the time.
There was no food coming in at the time when I arrived. There was nothing there. Just thousands of just, yeah, a brown-grey mass of people.
With the Horn of Africa plagued by drought and Ethiopia locked in battle, food was used as a weapon. More than 1 million people died from starvation and civil war. Inspired by an unprecedented report from the BBC, musicians Bob Geldof, Midge Ure, Harry Belafonte, Lionel Richie, and Michael Jackson initiated humanitarian efforts, including Band-Aid, We Are the World, and Live Aid. Where governments failed, musicians chose to stand together as one.
Thank you for coming. Join us for the next one. Bye.